And there's been local and international condemnation of the assassination of Swazi human rights lawyer and political activist Thulani Maseko. Maseko was gunned down in front of his wife and children in Mbabane, that's the capital city of Eswatini, almost a week ago. Now, speculation has been rife on who might have ordered the hit. Well, let's unpack this further. Joined now by a human rights activist, Mark Heywood, who has written a very, very interesting and heartfelt piece. Mark, I was reading your article this morning about Thulani Maseko. You have described a person who was a lawyer, an organizer, a kind person with a warm disposition, but a lawyer's precision. Talk to us about Thulani Maseko, the man you knew.
Good morning, and thank you. Yes, Thulani Maseko was a wonderful person. He was 52 years old. He was a father to 2 children. He's been a lawyer for many years, for nearly over 20 years of his life. And in all of his life as a lawyer, he's been dedicated to advancing democracy and human rights for people in his home country of Swaziland. He's used the law bravely. He went to prison for a year in 2015. And ultimately, although he was a man of peace, and as I say in the article, he was an extremist for dialogue and for peace, he was killed. And he was killed last Saturday night whilst he was watching television with his wife and children. An assassin shot him through the window of his house in his homestead, and it really is the most terrible loss to human rights, the most terrible loss to humanity, and many of us are feeling the pain at this moment.
In your article, Mark, you also included there an extract from the Sunday Times of Eswatini, which wrote about, and I quote now, a special missions unit, close quote, which has been hired by the Swazi government to counter terrorism. Perhaps let's start with, what do we know about a so-called terrorism agenda that is at play in Eswatini?
Okay, that's a very good question, and let me say plainly, there is no terrorism agenda in Eswatini. There's an agenda for democracy and for human rights. There are no terrorists in Eswatini. There are activists. And the activists are being killed at the instruction of a king, King Mswati III, and members of his government who are seeking to protect their extreme wealth. Mswati is one of the richest men in the world, in one of the poorest countries in the world. And the people of Swaziland are fed up. They want to live decent lives. They have been protesting for democracy. Just over a year ago, on June the 29th, 2021, in those protests, more than 100 people were gunned down by Swaziland police and defense forces. As you and I speak today, there are 2 members of parliament in Swaziland who are in prison, members of parliament, just because they were supporting the democracy movement in that country. So that is what Mswati calls terrorism. And what he has done, and we know this for a fact, is that he has recruited foreign mercenaries, that he's working with countries like Russia, but also with former apartheid security people in South Africa to organize assassinations and to instill fear into democracy activists. And it's something that we are still investigating, that the Times of Swaziland is investigating, and hopefully in coming weeks we will be able to expose what is going on.
If indeed mercenaries are being hired, Mark Heywood, by the Swazi government to conduct all of this, you mentioned there that there is a possibility of the involvement of South African mercenaries. Should the South African government be quiet then?
No, the South African government should not be quiet. The South African government should be investigating this through our own investigative agencies, and the South African government should be making plain that it stands beside the democracy movement. In fact, President Cyril Ramaphosa is the chairperson of the SADC defense defense and security organ, the troika that is meant to be helping to negotiate peace in Swaziland, and he has been failing in that responsibility. You know, that's a country of 1.2 million people, as you know, very well, it's surrounded almost by our own country, very, very close ties, close historical ties, close familial ties. We have a moral and a political responsibility to stand for human rights and democracy in that country, and to make sure that people from South Africa are not being recruited to do unlawful killing.
I want to quote one line, Mark Heywood, in fact, something of a paragraph, but I'm not going to go through all of it. This captures now your feelings about where we are as a country, and perhaps to an extent you are pointing to South Africa's foreign policy outlook. And you say the following, I quote, "I was once proud to be a South African, but that pride is fading rapidly. Our government hosts and engages the Russian Minister of Defense despite Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine and its blatant slow killing of Navalny and others, or Navalny, I should say, and others who justly protest the oppressive Russian regime." What are you saying there, Mark? Is there some kind of regression from South Africa's foreign policy outlook, which we were told many years that it is centered on human rights? Are you saying that we are veering from that?
Yes, we are. You know, our foreign policy outlook should be guided by our Constitution. And our Constitution places us very, very centrally around human rights and democracy, transparency and accountability, people's power, and our foreign policy should flow from our domestic policy. In many respects, we find ourselves on the side of tyrants and dictators. We prop up, we keep quiet about what is going on in Zimbabwe, we keep quiet about what is going on in Swaziland, and it seems as if we're choosing to support the dictatorship of Vladimir Putin over the people of Ukraine, and not only the people of Ukraine, over the people of Russia who are suffering the oppression of that regime. To call it disappointing is an understatement. It is immoral, and we will be found terribly wanting by history when we look back on these days.
Mark Heywood, thank you very much for your time and reflections of a man that you knew, Thulani Maseko, the human rights lawyer who was assassinated in Swaziland.